Three cold-hearted children decided to throw their own parents away like garbage. They left Rose and Anthony on a lonely road in the burning heat, with nothing but the clothes on their backs. "You're a burden we can't take anymore," they said. Then they drove away in their black Mercedes, and never looked back. But those three ungrateful children had no idea what they had just thrown away. Welcome to StoryVerse. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe. Also, tell us in the comments where you are watching from. New York, Canada, maybe South Africa or Jamaica. We want to know. Rose woke up that morning with a heaviness in her chest. Not the kind that comes from sickness. After 70 years of living, she knew the difference between a body that was hurting and a soul that was hurting. This was the second kind. It was the feeling you get when you slowly realize that the place you call home no longer wants you in it. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind of quiet that sits on top of things left unsaid, heavy, pressing down, waiting. Beside her, Anthony was still sleeping. His breathing was slow and a little rough, the way it had been ever since his heart started giving him trouble. She turned her head and looked at him, at his white hair, at the deep lines on his face, lines that told the whole story of his life if you knew how to read them. There were lines from laughter, and lines from worry. Lines from years of hard work and early mornings. Lines from the sleepless nights when the children were small and sick, and needed someone to hold them. She reached out and touched his gray hair, very gently, so she wouldn't wake him. "How did we get here, my love?" she whispered. He didn't hear her. He kept breathing, slow and rough, in and out. Rose got up. Every movement was its own small battle. Her knees, her back, her hands, stiff in the cold morning air. She moved slowly through the bedroom, past the old wedding photo on the wall. The two of them, young and bright-eyed, smiling like the whole world was a gift, and out into the hallway. In the kitchen, she did what she had done every morning for 50 years. She cooked. She didn't cook because anyone had asked her to. She cooked because it was the only language she had left that still felt like love. She cracked 3 eggs into the pan carefully, because eggs were not cheap, and put bread in the toaster, and put water on to boil for tea. 3 eggs for 3 people. She was already calculating. She would give Anthony 2. He needed the strength. She would take half of one herself. That would be enough. She was still standing at the stove when Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway. Sandra was 42 years old and worked as an accountant. She was still in her robe, her hair not yet done, but her expression was already fully awake, sharp and cold, and ready to find fault with something. She looked at the pan. She looked at the 3 eggs. "Mom," she said, and her voice had that tone. The tone Rose had been hearing more and more these days. The tone that made her feel like a child being corrected. "Those eggs again. Do you have any idea how much we spend on food in this house?" Rose kept her eyes on the pan. "I thought you'd want something before work," she said quietly. "I eat on the street. It's cheaper." Sandra walked to the counter and picked up a stack of papers, medical bills Rose could see, held together with a rubber band. She dropped them on the kitchen table with a hard, flat smack. "These came yesterday. Dad's prescriptions again." Rose did not look at the papers. She already knew what was in them. She turned the eggs over carefully. 3 eggs, Mom." Sandra's voice was getting sharper. 3 eggs, and you're standing there like you're feeding a restaurant. Every single day it's something. The electricity, the water, the medication, the food. She pulled her robe tighter around herself and shook her head. "I'm exhausted. We're all exhausted." Rose slid the eggs onto a plate. Her hands were steady. She had learned over many years to keep her hands steady, even when everything inside her was trembling. "Sit down," she said softly. "Eat something. I told you, I eat on the..." "Sandra." Rose turned and looked at her daughter. Just for a moment, just long enough to let the moment be what it was. "Sit down and eat something. Please." Sandra looked at her mother's face. Something flickered across her own. Something that might have been guilt, or might have been irritation. It was hard to tell with Sandra these days. She sat down. She pulled the plate toward her. She ate without saying thank you. Her eyes on her phone, her fingers scrolling through something that was apparently more interesting than the woman who had raised her. Rose made Anthony's plate and carried it to the bedroom. He was awake now, sitting up slowly, reaching automatically for his pills on the bedside table. Rose set the plate in front of him and sat on the edge of the bed. She watched him take his pill. She watched him look down at the 2 eggs and the toast and the small cup of tea. He looked up at her. He had known her for 50 years. He could read her face better than he could read any book. "What did she say?" he asked. "Nothing important," said Rose. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at his plate. He picked up his fork. "Rose," he said quietly. "Eat," she said. "While it's hot." He ate. She sat beside him, and outside the bedroom door, the house moved around them. Sandra's heels clicking on the floor. The television turning on in the living room, where Benjamin was already awake and already doing nothing. The sound of Robert's car pulling into the driveway, even though he had his own apartment across town, and no particular reason to be here this early. No particular reason, except the one Rose was beginning to understand. Something was coming. She could feel it the same way she could feel rain before it arrived. A pressure in the air, a stillness that was not peaceful, but waiting. She folded her hands in her lap and said nothing. And Anthony ate his eggs, and pretended he wasn't listening to the voices gathering outside the door. Robert didn't knock. He never knocked anymore. This was the thing Rose had noticed, the slow disappearance of small courtesies. First it was the knocking. Then it was the good mornings. Then it was asking before taking things from the refrigerator, before changing the television channel, before making decisions about a house that was not theirs. He walked straight into the bedroom where Rose was sitting, with Anthony still holding his fork, and Robert stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, and looked at them both with an expression that Rose could not quite name. Not unkind exactly, but not kind either. Something in between. Something worse than either. "We need to talk," he said. "All of us." In the living room. "I'm eating," Anthony said. "It won't take long." Rose put her hand on Anthony's arm. A small touch. A signal that passed between them in half a second. "Let's just go. It's easier. Don't fight it." He understood. He always understood. He set his plate on the bedside table, half the food still on it, and reached for his walking stick. The living room felt different with all 5 of them in it. Or maybe it had always felt this way, and Rose was only now seeing it clearly. Robert stood near the window. Sandra had moved from the kitchen table to the armchair, her pile of papers now on her lap. Benjamin was on the sofa, still in his pajamas, and he had the particular look of someone who already knows what is about to be said, and has already decided how he feels about it. Rose and Anthony sat together on the smaller sofa against the wall, the one that used to be in the center of the room, before Robert had rearranged the furniture one weekend without asking. "Okay," Robert said. He cleared his throat. "So, we've all been talking." "When?" Anthony asked. Robert paused. "Sorry? When did you all talk?" His voice was calm. "Because I didn't hear any of this talking." A look passed between the 3 siblings. Quick and small and almost invisible. But Rose caught it. She had spent 50 years watching people's faces. She caught everything. "We've been discussing it for a while," Sandra said smoothly. "Among ourselves. Because we didn't want to worry you, until we had a plan." "A plan?" Anthony repeated. "Yes." He nodded slowly, the way he did when he was keeping himself very, very calm. "What kind of plan?" Rose asked. Sandra opened her folder. Of course she had a folder. Sandra always had a folder. Rose thought, not for the first time, that her middle child had been born with a folder already in her hands. "I've been going through the household numbers," Sandra began. "And I want to be honest with you both, because I think honesty is important." Honesty, Rose thought. Yes, let's talk about honesty. The situation is not sustainable. Dad's medication alone is $200 a month. The electricity bill has gone up because of the heater. The grocery bill is significantly higher than it should be for a house this size, and the maintenance. "I built this house," Anthony said. "Dad." "With my hands." He held them up. The big, rough, trembling hands. These hands. 3 years. Every weekend. "I know that," Robert said. "And no one is taking that away from you. But things are different now. We have our own expenses, our own lives, and the honest reality is," he paused, and in that pause, Rose heard everything that was coming. She heard it the way you hear thunder before the lightning. Not the thing itself, but the warning of it, rolling toward you across the sky. "We found a place," Robert finished. "A care facility, not far from here. Clean, professional staff, other people your age. You'd have your own room, your meals taken care of, medical support on site for Dad's condition." "A nursing home," Anthony said. "A care facility. A nursing home." His voice was very quiet. "Now say what it is, Robert." The room went still. Benjamin looked at the floor. Sandra looked at her papers. Robert looked at his father, and for just a moment, just one small flicker, something moved across his face that might have been shame. Then it was gone. "It's the best option," he said. "For everyone." Rose did not cry. She had promised herself a long time ago that she would not cry in front of them. Not because she was too proud, but because she understood instinctively that her tears would not soften them. Some people are moved by tears. These three, she now understood, were not. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and she looked at her children, really looked at them, one by one, and she tried to find in their faces the small children she had carried, and fed, and stayed up with through the night, and loved with everything she had. She could find pieces of them. Robert's jaw was the same as it had been at 10 years old. Sandra had her grandmother's eyes. Benjamin, even now, even like this, had a softness around his mouth that he had been born with. But the children themselves, the ones she had known, seemed to have gone somewhere, replaced gradually, and without her noticing, by these three strangers who looked at her and saw only a number on a page. When she asked, Robert looked almost relieved that she wasn't arguing. "We've already spoken to them. They can take you at the end of the week." Already spoken to them. So the decision was made. It had been made before this conversation began. This was not a discussion. This was a notification. Rose nodded once. "All right," she said. Anthony looked at her sharply. She felt his eyes on her face. She did not look back at him. "All right," Benjamin said, and he sounded genuinely surprised, as though he had expected more fight and was almost disappointed not to get it. "All right," Rose said again. She stood up. She smoothed her dress. She walked back to the kitchen, and she finished washing the dishes from breakfast, and she did not make a single sound. Now stay with StoryVerse, because what happens next will change everything. It was later, much later, after Robert had gone, and Sandra had left for work, and Benjamin had gone back to sleep on the sofa, that Rose went to the backyard to hang the laundry. The backyard was small. Anthony had planted a lemon tree there years ago, when the children were young. It was a big tree now, spreading out over half the yard, and in the summer it gave more lemons than they could ever use. Rose used to make lemonade and leave it on the front step for the neighbors. She was hanging sheets when she heard the voices. She went still. The kitchen window was open. Sandra had come back. Her lunch break maybe, or she had forgotten something, and she was talking to Benjamin, who was apparently awake after all. Rose did not move. She held a wet sheet in her hands, and she listened. "Did you call them back?" Sandra was saying. "Yeah," said Benjamin. "Friday morning, they'll send a van." "Good." And the room, I'll start clearing it out this weekend. Awesome. The sound of the refrigerator opening. You think they'll actually stay there? Benjamin asked. Or will they try to come back? They won't come back, Sandra said. And her voice was flat and certain and completely without doubt. I'll make sure of it. And the house? A longer pause this time. The house is ours, Sandra said. It always should have been. They're too old to do anything with it. We'll sort out the legal side once they're settled. Robert's okay with that. Robert suggested it. Benjamin laughed. A short, low, comfortable laugh. The laugh of someone who has gotten away with something. What about Mom's stuff in the bedroom? All those boxes? We'll deal with it, Sandra said. Most of it's just junk anyway. The refrigerator closed. Footsteps moved away from the window. And Rose stood in the backyard, holding a wet sheet, beside the lemon tree Anthony had planted, under the sky they had all shared for 30 years. And now, only now, alone in the yard where no one could see her, she let herself cry. Not for long. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let the pain move through her and out of her, so she could think clearly again. Then she wiped her face with the hem of her apron. She hung the sheet on the line. She picked up the next one. There was still laundry to be done. That evening, Rose told Anthony everything. She waited until the house was noisy enough that no one would hear them. Benjamin's television loud down the hall. Sandra on a phone call in her room. Robert gone back to his apartment across town. Then she sat on the edge of the bed beside Anthony, and she told him quietly and carefully everything she had heard through the kitchen window. He listened without interrupting. That was unusual. Anthony was not a man who listened quietly to bad news. His whole life he had been the kind of man who stood up, who pushed back, who used his big hands and his loud voice to fight for the things that mattered to him. Rose had loved that about him. She had also, over the years, spent considerable energy calming him down. But tonight, he just sat and listened. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. The lamp on the bedside table was on, casting a warm yellow light over them both. Outside the window, the city made its nighttime sounds. Distant traffic. Someone's music. The bark of a dog 2 streets over. Normal sounds. Life going on. The house, Anthony said finally. Yes. They want the house. That's what Sandra said. He looked down at his hands. Those hands that had mixed concrete and carried bricks and hammered nails for 3 years to build the walls around them. He turned them over slowly, looking at them like they belonged to someone he used to know. I see, he said, and those 2 words, spoken so softly, broke Rose's heart more completely than any argument could have. She had expected him to be angry. Anger she could have handled. Anger was familiar. It was loud and hot, and it burned itself out eventually, like a fire. She knew how to sit with Anthony's anger, how to wait for it to pass, how to be there on the other side of it. But this was not anger. This was something quieter and more terrible. This was a man understanding, fully and finally, that the children he had given everything to had looked at everything he built and decided it was worth more without him in it. Anthony, she said. I'm all right. You don't have to be all right. He looked at her, and she saw it. The thing he was working very hard to hold inside. It moved behind his eyes, like water behind glass. What do we do? She asked. He was quiet again. The lamp flickered once, slightly, and steadied. Nothing, he said. We let them do what they're going to do. He said it slowly, like he was working it out as he spoke. We don't fight. We don't argue. We go. Rose stared at him. Anthony. I'm tired, Rose. And he said it in a way that meant more than just tonight, more than just this week. He said it in a way that meant years. I'm too tired to fight people who have already decided. And I don't want to spend whatever time I have left, arguing with my own children, in my own house. He reached over and took her hand. So we go, he said. And we hold our heads up when we go. And we don't give them the satisfaction of seeing us beg. Rose looked at this old man she had loved for 50 years, and she thought that even now, even here, even like this, he was still the finest person she had ever known. Okay, she whispered. Okay, he said. And they sat together in the lamplight, holding hands, while around them, the house that Anthony built, settled into its nighttime quiet. Friday came quickly. Rose spent the days before it doing what she always did, cooking, cleaning, moving through the house with her quiet efficiency. But now there was a different quality to it. She was paying attention in a way she hadn't allowed herself to before. The way the morning light came through the kitchen window and made a pale rectangle on the floor. The particular sound the third stair made. The smell of the lemon tree coming in through the back door on the breeze. She was memorizing it. She didn't pack much. A small bag each. Some clothes. Their important papers. Anthony's medication. The wedding photo from the wall. A small Bible that had belonged to Rose's mother, its cover worn soft as skin from years of handling. Sandra watched her pack with the careful eyes of someone making sure nothing extra was being taken. She didn't say this out loud, of course. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom and made small talk about the weather and the traffic. And all the while, her eyes moved over Rose's bag, counting. Rose zipped the bag closed and said nothing. The van arrived at 9 o'clock in the morning. 2 workers in blue uniforms. They were polite, professional, the kind of people who had done this many times, and had learned to be gentle about it. One of them carried Anthony's bag. The other offered Rose his arm on the front steps. Robert was there. Sandra was there. Even Benjamin had gotten dressed, which felt to Rose like its own kind of comment on the occasion. They stood on the front path and they performed the scene that Rose had known they would perform. The hugs, the reassurances, the promises. We'll visit every week, Robert said, hugging his mother. His arms were stiff. His voice was warm. The combination of the two things was almost more painful than no hug at all. Of course we will, Sandra said. She squeezed Rose's hand. Her fingers were cool. Benjamin hugged Anthony, and over his son's shoulder, Anthony's eyes met Rose's. Just for a second. Just long enough to say, I see this too. I see exactly what this is. Then Anthony stepped back and straightened up. He stood as tall as his body would allow him. He picked up his own bag, even though the young man in the blue uniform reached for it. He walked to the van under his own power. Rose looked at the green door one last time, chipped and faded, and still that particular shade of green that Anthony had chosen 30 years ago, because it reminded him of home. She turned away. She did not look back. The Sunrise Care Facility was 40 minutes across the city. Rose watched the streets go by through the van window. The city moved around them. People walking fast, cars pressing close, shops opening up for the morning, everyone going somewhere, everyone with somewhere to be. Anthony sat beside her with his walking stick between his knees. He looked out his own window. He hadn't spoken since they left. She took his hand. He gripped it tightly, more tightly than she expected. She held on. The facility was a low, wide building the color of old cream. There was a small garden out front with some benches and a few rose bushes, not yet blooming. The sign above the door was blue and cheerful, with a small drawing of a sun in the corner. Inside, it smelled of cleaning fluid, and something underneath the cleaning fluid that the cleaning fluid was trying to cover up. The floors were shiny and the lights were bright, and everything was very, very clean, in a way that felt more clinical than welcoming. A nurse with a clipboard took their names. Another one showed them to their room. It was small. 2 narrow beds, a window overlooking the car park, a shared bathroom down the hall. There was a television on a bracket on the wall, and a small table with 2 chairs. Meals are at 7, 12, and 6, the nurse said, smiling. There's a common room at the end of the hall. Activities most afternoons. If you need anything, just press the button by the bed. She left. Rose and Anthony stood in the middle of the small room and looked at it. Then Rose sat down on the edge of one of the narrow beds. She pressed her hand down on the mattress. She looked out the window at the car park. Anthony sat on the other bed. He set his walking stick against the wall. He folded his hands. "Well," he said. "Well," said Rose. Outside in the hallway, someone was crying. Not loudly. Just the quiet, steady crying of someone who had been doing it for a long time, and had almost stopped noticing. Down at the end of the hall, a very old man sat alone in the common room, in a chair facing the door, watching everyone who passed with hopeful eyes. He was still watching when Rose looked away. The first night was the hardest. Rose lay in the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the sounds of the place. It was never fully quiet. There was always something. A door opening somewhere, a distant television, the soft footsteps of the night nurse doing her rounds, the occasional cry or moan from somewhere down the hall that would start suddenly and then stop, like something being switched off. And underneath all of it, that quiet crying, still going, patient and endless, like rain. She turned her head and looked across the small gap between the two beds. Anthony was on his back, eyes open, staring at the same ceiling. "Can't sleep," she whispered. "No." She reached her hand across the gap between the beds. He reached his back. Their fingers found each other in the dark. "It won't always feel like this," she said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. "No," he agreed, though she could tell he wasn't sure either. They lay like that for a while, holding hands across the gap, until eventually Anthony's breathing slowed and deepened, and she knew he was finally asleep. She let go of his hand carefully, so as not to wake him. She folded her own hands on her chest. She did not sleep for a very long time. The days at Sunrise Care had a shape to them. Breakfast at 7, porridge or eggs, served in the large dining room where round tables were filled with elderly men and women who mostly ate in silence. Some of them had visitors on weekends. Most of them did not. They moved through the facility with the slow, careful movements of people who had learned that there was no point in hurrying, because nothing was coming that needed to be hurried toward. Rose tried to learn their names. That was how she was. She had always believed that knowing a person's name was the first small act of respect you could offer them. There was Margaret, who had been a school teacher and still carried herself like one. There was old Henry, the man from the common room chair, who it turned out had a wonderful laugh, once you got him talking about his garden. There was a tiny woman called Dorothy, who sat by the window every afternoon and looked out at the car park with an expression of absolute concentration, as though she was expecting someone to pull in at any moment. Dorothy's daughter had brought her here 6 months ago. She had not come back. Dorothy was still waiting. A week passed. No calls from Robert. No calls from Sandra. Nothing from Benjamin. Rose had not expected the calls to come. Not really. But there is a difference between not expecting something and experiencing the actual absence of it. Every time she passed the phone in the hallway, she felt it. A small, involuntary hope, followed immediately by a quiet crushing of that hope. She stopped looking at the phone after the 5th day. Anthony noticed. He noticed everything, even now, even with his health the way it was. He watched his wife move through this new small life, and he saw the places where the pain lived in her. The slight stiffening of her shoulders when she passed the phone. The way she looked at other residents visiting families on Sunday afternoon, with an expression she thought no one could see. He could see it. It made him quieter and quieter with each passing day. On the 8th day, Rose came back from breakfast to find him still in bed. He was lying on his side, facing the wall. His breakfast tray, which a staff member had brought to the room, was untouched on the table. "Anthony." "Nothing." "Anthony, sit up. You need to eat." "I'm not hungry." She sat on the edge of his bed. She put her hand on his arm. Through his thin pajama sleeve, she could feel how much weight he had lost in just 1 week. She had noticed it at breakfast too. He ate barely anything, just pushed the food around his plate and stared at the table. "Look at me," she said. He turned over slowly. His face was gray and tired. "You have to eat," she said. Your medication doesn't work on an empty stomach. You know that. What does it matter? He said. And it wasn't a question. It was something worse than a question. It was a statement, flat and dull and without any fight in it at all. Rose looked at her husband's face, and felt a fear move through her that was different from all the other fears she had carried in her life. This was not the fear of poverty, or illness, or loss. This was the fear of watching someone disappear, while they were still right in front of you. She picked up the fork from his breakfast tray. "Open your mouth," she said. "Rose Anthony James, open your mouth." He looked at her, and something in her voice, some firmness, some refusal to accept what was happening, reached him. He pushed himself up slowly. He took the fork from her hand. He ate. But she knew it was not enough. That afternoon, while Anthony slept, Rose sat in the common room with Margaret, the retired school teacher, and she let herself think clearly about their situation for the first time since they had arrived. They could not stay here. Not because the place was terrible. The staff were kind enough. The food was adequate. Her body was managing. But Anthony was fading. She could see it happening in real time, like a candle burning down. He needed air and purpose and dignity. He needed to feel like a man, and not a problem that had been filed away. Every day inside these cream-colored walls was taking something from him that she was not sure she could get back. "You're thinking very hard," Margaret said from across the table. Rose looked up. The old teacher was watching her with sharp, kind eyes. "Am I that obvious?" Rose said. "Only to someone who's been doing the same thinking," Margaret said. She folded her hands on the table. "How long have you been here?" 8 days. Margaret nodded slowly. "It gets easier," she said. Then she paused. "Or you get more used to it. I'm not sure those are the same thing. How long have you been here?" 14 months. She said it without any particular emotion. "The way you state a fact about weather." Rose was quiet. "My son brought me," Margaret continued. "He said it was temporary, while he sorted some things out at home." She looked out the window at the rose bushes. "He sorted things out. He didn't come back." The two women sat with that for a moment. "I'm sorry," Rose said. "Don't be," said Margaret. "Save it for yourself. You'll need it more than I do." She picked up her cup of tea. The ones who just arrived always have that look, like they're still waiting to wake up from a dream. Does the look go away? Margaret considered this seriously. The way a good teacher considers a question that deserves a real answer. "The look goes away," she said finally. "Whether that's a good thing or not, depends on the person." That night, Anthony couldn't sleep again. But this time, he was the one who reached across the gap first. "Rose," he said in the darkness. "I'm here. I want to leave." She was quiet. "I know we have nowhere to go," he said. "I know I'm sick. I know it doesn't make sense." His voice was low and deliberate, like he had been constructing this speech for some time. "But I would rather die outside in the open air, than stay in this place and disappear. I would rather fall down on a road somewhere, than sit in that dining room one more week and watch everyone waiting for people who are never going to come." Rose stared at the ceiling. "If we leave," she said carefully, "where would we go?" "I don't know." "Your medication?" "I have enough for 2 weeks, if I'm careful." "Anthony." They left before dawn. Anthony walked carefully, using his stick. Rose stayed close. She watched the way he was moving, his breathing, his pace, the set of his shoulders. She was always watching these things now, reading him the way you read weather. For the first 30 minutes, he was all right. Then the sky began to lighten, and with the light came the heat. Even in the early morning, the sun in the city had intention. It came up with purpose, pressing down on the pavement and bouncing back up from the road surface in waves. Rose felt it on the back of her neck and on her hands. She felt it in the weight of her bag. She glanced at Anthony. His pace had slowed. His breathing had changed. She could hear it now, slightly labored, slightly uneven. The sound she knew. "We can rest," she said. "Not yet. There's a bus stop." "Rose, not yet." She didn't push. She stayed beside him and matched his pace, which was slower now. And they moved together along the highway's edge, while the morning traffic began to build around them. Cars and trucks and motorbikes pressing past, none of them slowing. All of them full of people going somewhere, with the complete indifference of people who have somewhere to go. An old couple on the side of the highway with 2 small bags. No one stopped. No one looked. An hour passed, maybe more. Rose's own legs were aching now, her knees sending up their familiar complaints, but she pushed the feeling down and kept moving. She could be tired later. Right now, she needed to watch Anthony. He had gone very quiet. That was the sign she had learned to dread more than any other. When Anthony went quiet like this, not the thoughtful quiet of a man thinking, but the effortful quiet of a man conserving everything he had just to keep moving, it meant something was wrong inside him. Something was working too hard. "Anthony," she said. "A little further," he said. His voice was thinner than it had been an hour ago. "Now," she said. He stopped. She guided him to the edge of the road where there was a low concrete barrier, and she made him sit down on it. He sat heavily, like something had been holding him up and had let go all at once. His walking stick rattled against the concrete. She crouched in front of him and looked at his face, gray, damp with sweat despite the early hour. His lips had a color she didn't like. "Your pills," she said. "Did you take them this morning?" "Yes." "When did you last have water?" He thought about it. That alone worried her. The fact that he had to think about it. She dug into her bag and found the small plastic bottle she had filled before they left. She pressed it into his hands. He drank. The highway roared and rushed. The sun was fully up now, flat and hard, and offering no mercy. Rose stood up and looked at the road. At the cars going past. At the wide, empty landscape around them. The highway stretching in both directions. A few low buildings in the distance. Nothing close. She understood suddenly, with a clarity that hit her like cold water, how alone they were. No phone, no money to speak of, no one who knew where they were. An old woman and a sick old man on the side of a highway, and the world going past at 60 miles an hour without a glance. She didn't let herself feel the fear. Not yet. Fear could come later. She would find a private moment for it, the way she always did. Right now, she needed to think. She looked at Anthony. His breathing was still uneven. His hand on the concrete barrier was trembling. She looked up at the road. She stepped to the edge of it, and held out her arm. The first car didn't stop. The second didn't stop. The third didn't stop. She kept her arm out. She stood as tall as her 70-year-old body would allow, and she held her arm out at the rushing traffic, and she did not move. "Rose," Anthony said from behind her. "Be quiet," she said gently. Another car, not stopping. Another. She closed her eyes. She didn't pray fancy prayers. She never had. She just said inside herself, in the direct and simple way she had always talked to God, "Please. He needs help. Please send someone." She opened her eyes. And an old car, dented, dusty, moving slower than the traffic around it, pulled to the side of the road. The car stopped about 20 feet ahead of them. It sat there with its hazard lights blinking. Orange, orange, orange. While the traffic rushed past on the other side. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened, and a young man got out. He was perhaps 30 years old. Not tall, not large. Just an ordinary young man in work clothes, dark trousers, and a pale blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He had a plain, open face and dark eyes that moved quickly from Rose to Anthony, taking in the situation with the focused attention of someone who understood immediately that something was wrong. He walked toward them without hesitating. "Are you all right?" he said. He looked at Anthony on the barrier, at the walking stick, at Rose's outstretched arm still hanging in the air. "What happened? Are you hurt?" "My husband," Rose said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "His heart. He needs to sit down properly. He needs water and shade." "Okay." The young man said just that. "Okay." Like it was simple. Like there was nothing else to consider. He went straight to Anthony. He crouched down in front of him the way Rose had done, looked at his face, and then without asking permission, put his arm around the old man's back and his other hand under his arm. "I've got you," he said to Anthony. "Nice and slow. We're going to get you to the car." Anthony looked at him. Rose could see the pride moving across her husband's face. The instinct to say, "I can manage. I don't need help." And she watched Anthony look at this young stranger's face, and find something there that made him let the pride go. "All right," Anthony said quietly. "All right," the young man said. Together, they moved to the car. His name was Marcos. He told them this while he was helping Anthony into the back seat, pulling the seatbelt across him with careful hands, checking that his legs were comfortable. Then he took both their bags and put them in the boot, and opened the front passenger door for Rose with a naturalness that made her think he had been raised by someone who taught him how to treat people. "Where are you going?" he asked, as he got in and started the car. Rose opened her mouth. Closed it again. She had no answer to that question. Marcos looked at her in the mirror. He seemed to understand. He didn't push. "Hospital first," he said. "Everything else after." He pulled back into the traffic. In the back seat, Anthony's head fell back against the headrest. Rose turned around and looked at him every few minutes. His color was still not good, but the trembling in his hands had eased slightly. She thought that was better. She hoped that was better. Marcos drove without speaking, which she was grateful for. She wasn't ready to explain anything yet. She sat with her bag on her lap and looked out the window at the city passing by, and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. She felt like someone was steering. Not her. Not Anthony. Someone else. For just this moment, someone else was steering, and she could sit in the passenger seat and simply breathe. She hadn't realized how exhausted she was, until this moment when she didn't have to be the one holding everything together. She breathed. The hospital was 20 minutes away. Marcos pulled up to the emergency entrance and had Anthony out of the car and into a wheelchair before Rose had even gotten her door fully open. He spoke to the woman at the front desk with a directness and calm that moved things along in a way that Rose, arriving alone and old and uncertain, might not have managed as quickly. 78 years old, known heart condition, has been on his feet in the heat for over an hour, showing signs of cardiac stress, Marcos said. "He needs to be seen now." The woman looked at Anthony. She nodded. She picked up her phone. Within minutes, Anthony was being wheeled through the double doors. Rose started to follow. A nurse stopped her gently. "We'll take good care of him. Wait here, and we'll come and get you as soon as he's settled." The double doors swung closed. Rose stood in the corridor and looked at the place where her husband had just disappeared. She stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then she felt a gentle touch at her elbow. Marcos was beside her, holding a plastic cup of water. "Come and sit down," he said. They sat in the waiting area. 2 plastic chairs against a pale green wall. Rose held her cup of water, and Marcos sat beside her with his elbows on his knees, not speaking, not looking at his phone, just present, just there. After a while, Rose said, "You'll be late for work." "It's okay. You don't even know us." He was quiet for a moment. "My grandmother was in a place like this once," he said. "A hospital waiting room. And nobody came to sit with her." He looked at his hands. "I was too far away. By the time I got there, it was too late." He paused. "I don't like the idea of people sitting alone in hospitals." Rose looked at him. At his plain, open face. At the way he said it, not for effect, not to be thanked, just as a simple statement of fact, the way you explain why you do anything. "What is your name again?" she asked. "Marcos." "Marcos," she repeated. "I'm Rose." "I know," he said. "Your husband said it on the way here. Rose this, Rose that." A small smile. "He talks about you a lot, for someone who's having a heart episode." Rose laughed. It surprised her. The laugh. It came out before she could stop it. Small and sudden, and it left her feeling both lighter and somehow closer to tears at the same time. She pressed her hand over her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," Marcos said. "It's good to hear." 3 hours passed. A doctor came out and spoke to Rose. Anthony had suffered what they called a mild cardiac event. Not the full heart attack she had feared, but serious enough. His heart was under significant stress. He needed rest, medication adjustment, monitoring. He would need to stay at least 2 nights. "Is there family we can contact?" the doctor asked. Rose thought about Robert, Sandra, Benjamin. "No," she said. "There's no one." The doctor nodded and went back through the doors. Rose sat back down. Marcos was still there. He had bought them both sandwiches from the hospital cafe at some point, and a proper bottle of water, and he had set them quietly on the chair beside her without making a thing of it. She looked at him. "You have your own life," she said. "You should go." "I'll go when I know you're all right." "Marcos." "Mrs. Rose." He said it firmly but kindly. "The way you speak to someone you respect, but are not going to agree with. Please eat your sandwich." She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up the sandwich. She told him everything that evening. She hadn't planned to, but he was still there when visiting hours started, and he walked with her to Anthony's room. And he stood quietly in the corner while Rose sat beside Anthony's bed and held his hand. And Anthony looked at Marcos and said, "You're still here?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" Marcos considered this. "I'm not sure I can go until I know what happens next. If that makes sense." Anthony looked at him for a long time, with the focused eyes of a man who has spent 78 years reading people. "It makes sense," Anthony said. Then he looked at Rose. "Tell him," he said. "Anthony." "Tell him, Rose. From the beginning." So she did. She told Marcos about the house with the green door, about the children and the complaints and the folder of bills on the kitchen table. She told him about the morning they were gathered in the living room like a meeting, and about overhearing Sandra and Benjamin through the kitchen window. She told him about the van and the blue uniforms and the promises that everyone knew were not promises. She told him about the facility, about Dorothy by the window, about Anthony going quiet in the mornings, about lying awake and listening to his heart. She told him about the decision before dawn. Marcos listened to all of it without interrupting once. When she finished, the room was quiet, except for the soft beep of Anthony's heart monitor, steady and regular, doing its patient work. Marcos looked at the floor for a moment. Then he looked up. His face had changed. Not dramatically. He wasn't the kind of man for dramatic expressions. But something in his eyes was different. Something had settled there. A kind of quiet decision. The way a thing looks once someone has made up their mind. "I need to make a phone call," he said. He stepped out into the corridor. Rose looked at Anthony. "What do you think?" she said quietly. Anthony looked at the door where Marcos had just gone out. "I think," he said slowly, "that God listened to you this morning." Rose turned back to the heart monitor. To its steady, faithful beeping. "I think so too," she said. Marcos was gone for about 15 minutes. Rose used the time to do what she always did when she needed to steady herself. She focused on small, practical things. She poured Anthony a cup of water from the jug on his bedside table. She straightened his blanket. She found a comb in her bag and gently combed his hair the way she knew he liked it, parted on the left, flat and neat. Anthony submitted to this quietly, his eyes half closed. "You don't have to fuss," he murmured. "I'm not fussing," she said. "I'm combing your hair." "Same thing." "It is not the same thing." He smiled. "Just slightly. Just enough." She put the comb away and sat back down and held his hand, and they waited. When Marcos came back, his expression was different again, lighter this time, like the phone call had resolved something rather than complicated it. He pulled the spare chair from the corner and sat down across from them both. "I called my wife," he said. "You're married?" Rose said. 6 years. A quiet pride in it. "Her name is Anna." "I told her everything you told me." Rose looked at Anthony. Anthony looked at Marcos. "Everything?" Anthony said. "Everything." Marcos leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. "She wants to meet you. She had some things to say about your children that I won't repeat in a hospital room." A small smile. "Anna has strong feelings about things. It's one of the reasons I married her." Despite everything, despite where they were and how they had gotten here, Rose felt something move in her chest. Something warm and unexpected, like sun coming through a window you had forgotten was there. "She doesn't know us," Rose said. "No," Marcos agreed. "But she knows enough." He paused. "We have a house. It's not big. But there's a room that we use for storage, that isn't really storage. It's just full of things we keep saying we'll sort out, and never do." He looked at them both steadily. "Anna says we could have it cleared by the time you're discharged, if you wanted." The room was very quiet. The heart monitor beeped. "You're offering us a room," Anthony said slowly. "We're offering you a home," Marcos said. "For as long as you want it. Both of you." He said it simply, without performance, the way he had said everything else. Like it was just the obvious next thing. Anna's exact words were, "Bring them here, Marcos." Rose looked down at her hands in her lap. She looked at Anthony's hand under hers. She looked at the thin hospital blanket, the plastic jug of water, the pale green wall. She thought about all the things she had told this young man tonight, 50 years of her life laid out in a hospital room. And she thought about what it meant that a stranger had listened to all of it, and this was his response. She pressed her lips together. "We can't ask you to do this," she said. "You didn't ask," Marcos said. "I offered. We're old, and we take up space, and Anthony has medical needs." "Mrs. Rose." She stopped. "My grandmother," he said quietly. "The one I told you about. The one who was alone in the hospital." He paused. "She died not knowing that anyone was coming." He looked at her directly. "I have thought about that my entire adult life." He looked at her directly. "I am not going to be the reason another person feels that way. Not when I can do something about it." The room was silent. Anthony was watching Marcos with the same long, careful look he had given him earlier. Reading him. Taking the measure of him. "Young man," Anthony said finally. "Sir. What do you do for work?" Marcos looked slightly surprised by the question, given everything. "I'm a mechanic. I have a small garage. Nothing big." Anthony nodded slowly. "You built something yourself?" "I did." "With your hands, mostly?" "Yes." Anthony was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Rose, and Rose knew that look. She had seen it 10,000 times in 50 years. It was the look that meant, "This is right. I know it, and you know it, and there's no use pretending otherwise." She turned back to Marcos. "We'd like to meet Anna," she said. Anna came the next morning. Rose heard her before she saw her. A quick, bright voice in the corridor, asking a nurse which room. And then the door opened and a young woman came in, carrying a container of food and wearing an expression of such open, unguarded feeling that Rose instinctively stood up. Anna was perhaps 28, small and quick-moving, with dark eyes and the kind of face that shows everything it's thinking. She looked at Rose first, and immediately crossed the room and took both of Rose's hands in hers. "I'm so angry at your children," she said, by way of introduction. Rose laughed. That surprised laugh again. The one she couldn't stop. "I'm Anna," the young woman said. "I brought food, because hospital food is an insult to people who are already suffering." She set the container on the table, then turned to Anthony in the bed and pointed at him. You need to eat and rest, and not argue with anyone. Marcos told me you're stubborn." "Marcos doesn't know me," Anthony said. "He's known you for 1 day and he already knows," Anna said. She opened the container. "I made soup. It's not complicated, but it's good, and it's real food." She moved around the small hospital room with an ease that made it feel suddenly less clinical. She found bowls somewhere. She organized the bedside table. She sat in the spare chair and talked about the room she and Marcos were clearing, about the neighborhood, about the market 2 streets away where the vegetables were better than anywhere else. She talked the way some people do, not to fill silence, but because she was genuinely present and genuinely interested, and had a great deal of warmth that needed somewhere to go. Anthony watched her with a growing expression that Rose recognized too. It was the expression he used to wear watching their children when they were small and good, before everything became complicated. It was the expression of someone being unexpectedly delighted. By the time Anthony was discharged 2 days later, the room in Marcos and Anna's house was ready. Anna had sent Marcos a photograph on his phone, which he showed to Rose in the hospital corridor. A simple room with a proper bed, a wardrobe, a window that looked out onto a small yard with a tree in it, clean curtains, a bedside table with a lamp. Rose looked at the photograph for a long time. "The tree," she said. "What kind is it?" Marcos looked at the photo. "I actually don't know. Anna planted it. You could ask her." "It looks like it might be a lemon tree," Rose said quietly. Marcos looked at her face, at whatever was in it, and didn't ask. The drive to Marcos and Anna's house took them through parts of the city Rose hadn't seen before. Smaller streets, quieter, with washing lines between buildings and children on bicycles and corner shops with their doors open. The house itself was modest, a low, solid building with a small garden in front, painted a faded yellow that had probably once been brighter. There was a bicycle leaning against the outside wall, and a pair of work boots by the door. Anna was waiting on the step. She had clearly been watching for the car, because she came down the path before it had even stopped, opening the back door for Anthony with the careful attention of someone who had thought about how to do this correctly. Slowly, she said. "There's no hurry." She and Marcos got Anthony up the path between them. Rose followed, carrying both bags, looking at the small garden, a little overgrown, a few flowers struggling cheerfully through the weeds, and at the door, which was painted blue. Not green, but a good color, she thought. A welcoming color. She stepped inside. The room was exactly as the photograph had shown it, but warmer in person. Anna had put a small vase of flowers on the bedside table, just simple ones bought from the market probably, and had folded the blanket back neatly, the way you do when you want someone to feel expected. Rose stood in the doorway and looked at it. She felt Anthony come to stand beside her. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. Behind them, Marcos and Anna stood in the hallway, and there was a small silence that contained everything. All the strangeness, and the sadness, and the extraordinary unlikeliness of how they had all ended up here, in this moment, in this small room, with its window and its lamp and its vase of simple flowers. Then Rose walked in and set her bag on the chair. "Right," she said. "Let's get you lying down." "I'm fine," Anthony said. "You just left the hospital," she said. "Lie down." "She's right," Anna said from the doorway. Anthony looked at Marcos for support. "Don't look at me," Marcos said. Anthony muttered something under his breath, but he sat on the bed. Anna caught Rose's eye from across the room and smiled, quick and bright and conspiratorial. The smile of one woman to another that said, "We understand each other perfectly." That evening, they all ate together at the small kitchen table. It was a simple meal. Rice, beans, some chicken that Anna had cooked with herbs, that filled the house with a smell so warm and ordinary and good, that Rose had to stop in the kitchen doorway for a moment and just breathe it in. She thought, this is what a house is supposed to smell like. They talked. Not about big things. About small things. Marcos's garage, a difficult customer he'd had that week. Anna's work at the community center. The tree in the yard, which Anna confirmed was a lemon tree. And at this information, Rose and Anthony exchanged a look that they did not explain. After dinner, Marcos made tea, and they sat a little longer. Outside, the city settled into its evening. Inside the small yellow house on the quiet street, 4 people sat around a kitchen table, and the conversation moved easily between them, and the tea was hot, and the lamp was warm. Rose looked across the table at Anthony. His color was better than it had been in weeks. He was sitting up straight, the way he used to sit when he felt like himself. He was listening to something Marcos was saying, with genuine interest in his eyes. He looked up and caught her watching him. And he smiled. The real one. The big one she had fallen in love with. The one that had been hiding behind all those gray and difficult weeks. She smiled back. More tea? Anna said. Please, said Rose. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. The days in the small yellow house had a gentleness to them that Rose hadn't known in years. She woke in the mornings without the heaviness in her chest, or at least without the particular heaviness that had lived there in the house with the green door. She still woke early, as she always had, but now the early morning felt like a gift rather than a duty. She and Anna had developed a quiet morning rhythm, without ever discussing it. Rose came to the kitchen first and put the water on. Anna came down 10 minutes later, and they moved around each other with the comfortable ease of people who had decided wordlessly to trust each other. They talked about small things in the early morning. What to cook. The weather. Something Anna had heard at the community center. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, and that was comfortable too. Anthony was getting stronger. Not quickly, and not without setbacks. There were days when he barely left the bed, days when his heart reminded him sharply of its limitations. But there were also days when he sat in the small garden with Marcos on the weekend, the two of them talking about the lemon tree and the state of the fence and other practical things that needed doing. There were days when the color stayed in his face all the way through to evening. Rose watched him carefully and said nothing about what she saw. But she saw it. One morning, about 4 weeks in, Anna came downstairs to find Rose already cooking. Not just tea, but a full breakfast. Eggs, fried plantain, toast, everything arranged on the counter with the efficient organization of a woman who had been feeding people for 50 years. Anna stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at it. Rose, she said. You don't have to do this. I know, Rose said. I wanted to. Anna looked at her for a moment. Then she came and stood beside her at the stove and picked up a spatula. Show me how you do the plantain, she said. Mine always comes out wrong. Too much oil, Rose said immediately. Marco says the same thing, and I always think he's wrong. He's not wrong. Anna laughed. Don't tell him that. They stood at the stove together in the early morning light. Rose showing Anna the exact heat, the exact moment to turn. The small things that took years of practice to learn, but that she could give away for free. This is also how she showed love. She hadn't lost that. Marcos came down to find breakfast on the table and both women already seated. He stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the spread. I thought I heard cooking, he said. Sit down, Anna said. Rose made it. Marcos looked at Rose. You didn't have to. If one more person says that to me, Rose said pleasantly, I will be upset. Marcos sat down. He tried the plantain. He looked at Anna. This is better than yours, he said. I know, Anna said. She showed me. Can she show you again? Several more times. Anna threw a piece of bread at him. Anthony arrived at the kitchen door at that moment, walking stick in hand, and took in the scene. The bread on the floor. Marcos laughing. Anna trying not to. Rose shaking her head with the expression of someone surrounded by beloved idiots. He pulled out his chair and sat down. Normal morning then, he said. It was on a Tuesday, 5 weeks after their arrival, that the letter came. Rose was in the garden with Anthony. He was sitting in his chair in the morning sun. She was doing something with the flower bed that Anna had started and abandoned, a project of turning it into something more organized. She had her hands in the soil and was thinking about nothing in particular, which was itself a kind of luxury she had almost forgotten. She heard Anna call from inside. "Rose, there's a man at the door. He's asking for Anthony." Rose looked up. She and Anthony exchanged a glance. "What kind of man?" Anthony called back. "He says he's from a law firm." A silence. Rose sat back on her heels. She looked at her hands, dark with soil. She looked at Anthony. His expression was one she couldn't read. "Send him out," Anthony said. The man was young, no more than 30, in a neat suit that was slightly too warm for the weather. He carried a leather folder and had the careful, precise manner of someone trained to deliver difficult information without drama. He looked at Anthony in his garden chair and checked something in his folder. "Mr. Anthony Walker?" "That's me," Anthony said. "My name is Daniel Cole. I'm with Henry & Burns, attorneys at law." He opened the folder. "We have been attempting to reach you for some time, sir. We had a previous address on file." "We moved," Anthony said simply. "Yes. We eventually located you through the hospital records, with your permission obtained through the facility." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Walker, I'm here regarding the estate of your grandfather, Mr. George Walker, who passed away 3 years ago." Rose lowered her trowel. Anthony said nothing. His face was very still. "Your grandfather," the young man continued, "left a substantial estate. Under the terms of his will, the estate passes to his eldest surviving male descendant, which our research has confirmed is you." He paused. "The estate includes 10 residential rental properties across the city, currently managed by our firm, and liquid assets totaling just over $20 million. The garden was very quiet. Somewhere in the lemon tree, a bird was making a small, persistent sound. "$20 million?" Anthony said. "Yes, sir." "Dollars?" "Yes, sir." Anthony looked at Rose. Rose looked at Anthony. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Anthony said, in the same quiet voice, "And why is it only reaching me now? 3 years after my grandfather died?" The young man shifted slightly. "That is something we need to discuss, sir. We have been sending correspondence to your address for 3 years. The letters were received. We have delivery confirmation. But we received no response." He paused carefully. "It was only when our firm escalated to a formal search that we were able to determine you had apparently never seen the letters." Rose felt it then. The thing she had been about to understand, arriving fully formed and terrible. She thought of Sandra's folder. Sandra's careful eyes watching her pack. The pile of papers always on the kitchen table. Sandra, the accountant who sorted all the household mail, who handled all the correspondence, who always knew exactly what was coming in and going out. Her voice through the kitchen window. "The house is ours. It always should have been." "The letters," Rose said, and her voice came out very soft. "They went to our old house." "Yes, ma'am. And someone there received them. The delivery records show they were signed for." Rose stood up from the flower bed. She didn't brush the soil from her hands. She stood in the small garden in the morning sun and felt something move through her. Not anger, not yet. Something older and colder than anger. The feeling of understanding something completely. Anthony was watching her face. "They knew," she said. Not a question. "Rose." "They knew, Anthony." Her voice was still quiet, still steady. "The medication bills, the electricity, the eggs." She stopped. Steadied herself. "They were going to send us away, and keep the letters, and wait." Anthony said nothing. The young man in the suit looked between them with a careful expression of someone who understood that something significant was happening, and that his job right now was simply to be still. Anna had come to the back door at some point. Rose didn't know when. She was standing there with a dish towel in her hands, and her face, that open, expressive face that showed everything, showed this. Her eyes were bright with anger. Not for herself. For them. Rose looked at her, and felt unexpectedly the sting of tears. Not from grief this time. From something else entirely. From the particular feeling of being seen by someone, of having another person's outrage on your behalf, when you are too tired for your own. She pressed her lips together and turned back to the young man. "What do we need to do?" she said. "I have documents for Mr. Walker to review and sign. We'll need to formally establish your new address with the firm, and we'd recommend engaging your own legal counsel too." "We'll come to your office," Rose said. "This week?" "Of course. Thursday would." "Tomorrow," Rose said. The young man looked at her. Then he nodded. "Tomorrow," he agreed. That evening, after dinner, after the young man had gone and the papers were on the kitchen table and Anna had made tea that nobody was really drinking, the four of them sat together in the small, warm kitchen, and no one spoke for a while. Then Marcos said carefully, "What are you going to do?" Anthony looked at the papers. He looked at Rose. "That's a good question," he said. "Your children," Marcos said. "They'll find out eventually." "Yes," Anthony said. "They will." "And they'll come," Anna said. Her voice was flat. "People like that always come when the money appears." Another silence. Rose wrapped her hands around her teacup. She thought about Robert's stiff arms, Sandra's cool fingers, Benjamin's comfortable laugh. She thought about a lemon tree, and a green door, and 50 years of love given freely and squandered by people who never understood what they were holding. She thought about Dorothy still sitting by the window. She thought about Margaret, 14 months, and still upright. She thought about all the people in that facility who were waiting for someone to come. She looked up. "I know what I want to do," she said. Everyone looked at her. "Not about the children." "I know what to do about them too, but that can wait." She set down her cup. "I mean with it. The money, the properties." She looked at Marcos, then Anna, then Anthony. "I know what I want to do with it." Anthony looked at her face. That look again. Reading her. Knowing her. And slowly, he nodded. "Tell us," he said. Rose was quiet for a moment before she spoke. Not because she was unsure. She had known the moment she understood what the inheritance meant, with a clarity that felt less like a decision and more like a recognition. Like something that had always been true, waiting for her to catch up to it. She was quiet because she wanted to say it right. "That facility," she began. "Sunrise Care." Everyone waited. "Dorothy," she said. "The woman by the window." "Margaret." The old man with the wonderful laugh. "Henry." She paused. "There are people in that place who have been there for years. Not because they need medical care, not because they can't think or feel or contribute to the world." She looked at her hands around the teacup. "They're there because their families decided they were inconvenient." The kitchen was very still. "I want to build something," Rose said. "Not a facility, not a place with clipboards and visiting hours and rooms that smell of disinfectant. A home." She looked up. "A real home where old people can live with dignity. Where someone knows their name and asks about their life and sits with them in the morning." She paused. "The kind of place that should exist everywhere, and almost never does." Marcos was leaning forward with his elbows on the table. Anna had stopped pretending to drink her tea. Anthony was watching Rose with an expression she knew, the expression of a man watching someone say out loud the thing he had been quietly thinking, and had not yet found words for. "The properties," Rose continued. "Some of them could generate income to run it. One of them, depending on its size, could become the home itself. She looked at Marcos. You know how to build things and fix things. She looked at Anna. And you work at a community center. You understand how to organize a place and make it run. She looked between them. I'm not asking you to give up your lives. I'm asking if you'd want to help build something worth building. Silence. Then Anna put both hands flat on the table. Yes, she said. Simply and immediately. As if Rose had asked her whether she wanted to breathe. Marcos looked at his wife, then at Rose, then at Anthony. What does he think? Marcos said, nodding at Anthony. Everyone looked at Anthony. Anthony had been silent through all of it. He sat with his walking stick between his knees, and his eyes on Rose. And the expression on his old face was one that Marcos and Anna couldn't fully read, because they hadn't known him long enough. But Rose could read it. It was the expression he had worn the day he finished building the house on Maple Street. Standing back, looking at it, paint on his hands and exhaustion in his bones, and absolute quiet satisfaction in his eyes. The expression of a man who has just seen what he was building all along. I think, Anthony said slowly, that I would like to go and speak to Henry first. And Dorothy and Margaret. He paused. Before we make plans, I want to go and ask them what they'd want, what they need. He looked at Rose. It's their home we're building. They should have a say in it. Rose felt a warmth spread through her chest so strong it almost hurt. Yes, she said. Exactly that. Thursday came. They pushed the lawyer's appointment back by one day. Marcos drove them to the offices of Henry and Burns, which occupied 3 floors of a glass building in the business district. Rose wore her good dress. Anthony wore the jacket she had packed in their small bag the night they left. His good jacket. The dark one with the gold buttons that he saved for important occasions. He had known. She realized that, even then. Or maybe he had just packed it because hope is a stubborn thing, and refuses to be completely left behind, even in the worst moments. The meeting took 2 hours. There was a great deal of paper, a great deal of careful language. But the essential facts were simple. Anthony was the legal heir. The estate was his. The properties were generating steady rental income. The liquid assets were sitting in an account that had been quietly accumulating interest for 3 years. 3 years. Rose sat in the leather chair and listened to the lawyer explain numbers. And beneath the numbers, she heard the other thing. All that time. All that money sitting and waiting, while Sandra filed the letters somewhere, and Robert made speeches about sustainability, and Benjamin laughed his comfortable laugh. She kept her hands folded in her lap and her face composed. What are our options regarding the previous address, she asked, when the lawyer paused. He looked at her carefully. In what sense, Mrs. Walker? The letters were delivered there, and signed for, over 3 years. And the people who signed for them did not inform my husband of their existence. She paused. What does that constitute, legally? The lawyer was quiet for a moment. He folded his hands on the desk. That would likely constitute fraud, he said. Potentially inheritance fraud, depending on the specific circumstances and intent. He paused. Do you wish to pursue that? Rose looked at Anthony. Anthony looked at the window. Not yet, he said. We'll come back to that question. The visit to Sunrise Care was the following morning. Rose had called ahead, not to the management, but to Margaret directly, through the facility's common phone. Margaret had sounded surprised, and then not surprised, and then very pleased, in the way of someone who has learned to keep their expectations low, and is therefore moved by small kindnesses. And bring something from outside, Margaret had said. Anything. A newspaper, a flower, something that smells like the city. You'll understand when you get here. Rose understood before they even walked in. The smell hit her first. The cleaning fluid, and what was under it. The bright lights. The stillness of the air inside. The particular stillness of a place where the windows don't open enough. But she walked through it with different eyes this time. Not the eyes of someone arriving. The eyes of someone assessing. She saw the common room, large enough but sparse. She saw the small garden outside the window, barely used, with the struggling rose bushes. She saw the dining room with its round tables and its institutional quiet. She saw the staff, busy, kind enough, but moving with the speed of people who have too many tasks and not enough time to simply be with someone. She saw Dorothy, still in the chair by the window. Rose went to her first. She pulled up a chair beside her and sat down. And Dorothy looked at her with the focused look she always wore. And then something shifted in it. Recognition. Surprise. "You left," Dorothy said. "I did," Rose said. "I didn't think people left." "I didn't think so either." Dorothy looked at her for a long moment. "Where did you go?" "Somewhere better," Rose said. "That's what I want to talk to you about." Margaret arrived in the common room with the straight-back dignity of a retired schoolteacher, shook Rose's hand, looked at Anthony with approval, and then looked at Marcos and Anna, who had come along and stationed themselves near the door with the careful unobtrusiveness of people trying not to take up too much space. "Who are they?" Margaret said. "Family," Rose said. Margaret looked at them again. At the way Marcos held the door for an elderly man with a walker. At the way Anna had immediately, instinctively, sat down beside an old woman who was alone at a table and started talking to her. "Chosen family," Margaret said. "The best kind," Rose said. Margaret nodded slowly. She sat down. She folded her hands on the table in the way of a woman who has always run meetings. "All right," she said. "Tell me what you're thinking." Henry laughed when Rose told him. Not the small, polite laugh of someone being agreeable. The Rael laugh, big and warm and completely unself-conscious. The one she had discovered in their first conversation weeks ago. The one that had told her immediately everything she needed to know about who he was. "A real home," he said. "With a garden." "A proper garden?" Rose said. "That we actually go into and use. And we'd have a say in how it runs. That's the idea." He laughed again. Then he stopped laughing and looked at her. "Seriously," he said. "You mean this? You're not just..." He stopped. "This isn't a nice thing to say." "Henry," Rose said. "I have never in my life said something nice that I didn't mean." He looked at her for a long moment. "My son hasn't called in 4 months," he said. "I know. I used to have a vegetable garden. I grew tomatoes, peppers, 3 kinds of beans." He looked out the window at the struggling rose bushes. "I'd like to grow things again." "Then we'll make sure there's space for it," Rose said. Henry looked down at his large, old hands. Then he looked back up. "I'm in," he said. They stayed at Sunrise Care for 3 hours. By the time they left, they had spoken to 11 residents. Not all of them could come. Some needed medical levels of care that a home couldn't provide. But 8 of them, including Dorothy and Margaret and Henry, lit up in the particular way that people light up when something they had stopped allowing themselves to hope for suddenly becomes possible. On the way back to the car, Anna was quiet for a long time. Then she took Rose's arm. "Dorothy," she said. "When you told her, did you see her face?" "Yes," Rose said. "She stopped watching the door," Anna said. "Just for a little while. She stopped watching for her daughter, and she was just there with us." "Yes," Rose said. Anna was quiet again. They walked a little further. "We're really doing this," Anna said. Not a question. A realization landing. "We're really doing this," Rose said. 3 weeks later, the black Mercedes appeared. Rose was in the front garden of the small yellow house. She and Anna had been working on it together, turning the overgrown patch into something real, something with order and color and intention. She was on her knees in the soil with her gardening gloves on when she heard the car. She didn't need to look up to know. She knew the sound of that engine. She had heard it in the driveway of the house with the green door for years. She sat back on her heels. She took off her gloves. She stood up slowly, brushing the soil from her dress, and turned around. The Mercedes was parked at the curb. All three doors opened at the same time. Robert from the driver's side, Sandra from the passenger seat, Benjamin unfolding himself from the back. They were dressed well. Robert in his expensive shirt, Sandra with her hair done. Even Benjamin looked like he had made an effort. They stood on the pavement and looked at her, and she stood at the garden gate and looked at them. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Robert smiled. The big, warm, practiced smile that had always been his best performance. "Mom," he said, opening his arms. "We've been so worried about you." Rose looked at her son. She thought about the nursing home van, about Sandra's cool fingers, about the kitchen window and the words she was not supposed to have heard. She thought about $20 million sitting in an account for 3 years, and a stack of letters signed for and hidden away. She did not move toward him. "Robert," she said. He kept the smile up, but something shifted behind it. A slight uncertainty, like a man who has rehearsed a scene and suddenly isn't sure the other person is following the script. "Why don't we go inside?" Sandra said smoothly, looking past Rose at the house. Her accountant's eyes moving, calculating, assessing. "We have a lot to catch up on." "Yes," said Rose. "We do." She opened the gate. She led them inside without hurry. This was deliberate. Rose had learned over 70 years that the person who moves slowly in a tense situation is the person who holds the power. She walked up the garden path at her own pace and opened the front door and stepped inside without looking back to see if they were following. They were following. She could hear their footsteps behind her. Robert's confident stride. Sandra's heels on the path. Benjamin's slightly shuffling walk. She could hear them taking in the house too. The small adjustments in their footsteps that meant they were looking around, assessing. She led them to the sitting room. It was a modest room, Marco's and Anna's furniture, simple and worn in the comfortable way of things that have been genuinely used. There were flowers on the windowsill that Rose had cut from the garden that morning. There was a photograph on the shelf that Anna had put there 2 weeks ago. The four of them, Rose and Anthony and Marcos and Anna, taken in the garden on a Sunday afternoon, when Anthony had been having a good day and the light was kind. Sandra saw the photograph. Rose saw Sandra see it. "Sit down," Rose said. They sat. Robert and Sandra on the sofa. Benjamin in the armchair in the corner, arranging himself with the ease of someone settling in for a comfortable visit. Rose sat in the upright chair across from them, the one that had become, without anyone designating it as such, her chair. She folded her hands in her lap. She waited. Robert leaned forward. "Mom," he said, "I want you to know, we've been worried sick. When we found out you'd left the care facility, that you just walked out." "Before dawn," Rose said. "Sorry?" "We left before dawn. Not the middle of the night. Before dawn." A small pause. "The point is," Robert continued, recalibrating smoothly, "we didn't know where you were. We called the facility and they said you were just gone. Dad's condition. Anything could have happened." "Something did happen," Rose said. "Your father had a cardiac event on the side of the highway. He spent 2 nights in the hospital." The room was quiet. Benjamin shifted in the armchair. "We didn't know that," Sandra said. Her voice had something in it. The right amount of distress, carefully measured. "If we'd known, you would have called," Rose said. Sandra opened her mouth. "You had the facility's number," Rose said. "You put us there. You could have called at any time in those 2 weeks to check whether we were alive." She said it pleasantly. "The way you state a simple fact. You didn't call once." No one answered that. The front door opened. Marcos came in first, still in his work clothes, wiping his hands on a cloth from the garage. He stopped when he saw the 3 visitors, and something crossed his face. A quick reading of the room that took less than 2 seconds. And then he nodded and moved to stand near the doorway, without sitting down. Anna came in behind him. She was carrying groceries, and she stopped in the hallway, looked through the sitting room door, and then set the bags down carefully and came to stand beside Marcos. The three children looked at them. "Who are these people?" Robert asked. "This is Marcos," Rose said. "And this is Anna. This is their home. Anthony and I live here." "You live here," Sandra repeated. "Yes. With strangers." "With family," Rose said. "The same way I once lived with you." Sandra's expression flickered. Anna caught Rose's eye from the doorway. Rose gave the smallest possible nod. Anna went to the kitchen. From the hallway a few minutes later came the sound of the kettle and the ordinary domestic sounds of someone making tea, and the absolute normalness of it in contrast to the tension in the sitting room was, Rose thought, exactly right. Anthony appeared at the sitting room door. He moved slowly, leaning on his stick, and he stood in the doorway and looked at his three children with an expression that was impossible to read. Not angry, not wounded. Something beyond both of those things. Something that had passed through anger and grief and come out the other side into a kind of clear, still knowing. "Dad," Robert said. He stood up. He crossed the room and tried to embrace his father. Anthony let him. He stood with his son's arms around him, and he looked over Robert's shoulder at Rose, and Rose looked back at him, and neither of them needed to say anything. Robert stepped back. "You look well," he said, and he seemed surprised by it. "I'm better," Anthony said. He moved into the room and sat in the chair beside Rose's, and Marcos moved a footstool into position nearby, without being asked, and Anthony nodded at him briefly, in the way of two people who understand each other. Robert watched the small exchange. "So," Anthony said. "You came." "Of course we came," Sandra said. "You're our parents." "Yes," Anthony said. "We are." Another silence. Benjamin, Rose noticed, had said almost nothing since they arrived. He sat in the armchair looking at the photograph on the shelf, with an expression she hadn't seen on his face in years. She wasn't sure what it was. She filed it away. Robert crossed his legs and settled back into the sofa with the gesture of a man who has decided to change approach. "We want you to come home," he said. "This is our home," Rose said. "Mom, be serious." This, he gestured at the room around him. "Careful," Marcos said from the doorway. His voice was quiet and level. Robert looked at him. A quick assessment, the way Robert looked at everyone, measuring, categorizing. "I meant no offense," he said. "Then be careful not to give any," Marcos said. Another silence, different from the previous ones. Rose watched Robert adjust. She could see him recalculating the way he always had when a situation wasn't going according to plan. He was a practical man. He knew when a position wasn't working and he knew how to move to the next one. "There are things we need to discuss," Sandra said. "As a family. Important things." She looked at Rose, then at Anthony. "About your grandfather's estate." There it was. Rose had known it was coming. She had known it since the moment the black Mercedes pulled up to the curb. The pretense had run out more quickly than she expected. They hadn't even finished their tea. She looked at Sandra. "Go on," she said. Sandra straightened slightly. "We became aware recently that there may be some assets." 20 million, Anthony said. "And 10 properties." Sandra stopped. "You know," Robert said. "We know," Anthony said. The room was very still. Then something changed. A subtle but unmistakable shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before weather arrives. The performance of the concerned children, which had been wearing thin since they walked in, dropped away entirely. Not dramatically. Just quietly gone. Sandra closed her hands together in her lap. "Then you understand," she said, "that this is a family matter. That these assets belong to the family. That whatever has happened between us." "Whatever has happened," Rose said. Sandra continued without pausing. "Should not affect how we handle this together. As a family. As a family, Rose said again. She let the words sit there. Anna came in with the tea tray and set it on the table between them, with a quiet precision that somehow managed to feel both hospitable and like a statement. She poured 5 cups without asking how anyone took it, set them down, and then sat on the arm of Marcos's chair, with the calm of a woman in her own home who has nothing to prove. Nobody touched the tea for a moment. You hid the letters, Anthony said. Sandra looked at him. 3 years of letters from the law firm, Anthony said. Delivered to our house. Signed for. Hidden. His voice was even and quiet. The same voice he had used when their children were young and had done something wrong, and he needed them to understand the weight of it. Why, Dad? Not a speech, Sandra. Just the reason. Sandra looked at her hands. Robert looked at the window. Benjamin, in the corner, still looked at the photograph. The silence stretched. And then Benjamin said, without looking away from the photograph, because we thought you'd give it away. Everyone looked at him. He finally turned from the photograph. His face had the look she had filed away. The one she hadn't been able to name before. She could name it now. It was shame. That's the real reason, Benjamin said. Isn't it, Sandra? Not a question. We thought if you found out, you'd give it all away to someone. A church, or a charity, or I don't know. He stopped. You thought we'd give it to people who needed it, Rose said. Benjamin said nothing. And that seemed like the wrong thing to do, Rose said. He looked at her. We thought it should stay in the family. We are doing something with it for the family, Rose said. Just not the family you mean. She told them then, calmly and completely. The home she was going to build. The people who would come to live in it. Henry and his vegetable garden. Dorothy in her window. Margaret and her straight-backed dignity. The ones nobody was coming back for. She watched their faces as she spoke. Robert's was unreadable, the expression he wore when processing something he hadn't anticipated. Sandra's moved through several things quickly. Calculation. Dismissal. A brief reconsideration. Benjamin looked at the floor. When she finished, Robert spread his hands. Mom, it's a lovely idea. Really? But $20 million is enough to do it properly, Rose said. It's your inheritance, Sandra said. Yours and Dad's. You should be comfortable. You should have security. You should. Sandra. She stopped. What you should have, Anthony said slowly, is the courage to say what you actually came here to say. Not what you think sounds reasonable. He looked at his daughter. Really looked at her. The long, patient look of a father who has known someone since before they knew themselves. Say it plainly. You'll feel better. Sandra looked at her father. For a moment, just a moment, something moved across her face that Rose recognized from long ago. From when Sandra was 7 years old and had broken something and tried to hide it, and then couldn't carry the weight of the secret anymore. But she was not 7 years old. And the moment passed. We want our share, Sandra said flatly. That's what we came to say. I know, Anthony said. Ah. And nothing, Anthony said. Not today. He reached for his walking stick. He stood up slowly. Marcos moved slightly, but Anthony shook his head. He wanted to do this himself. He stood to his full height, which was still considerable, and he looked at his 3 children. You'll hear from our lawyer. There are things to resolve, and they'll be resolved properly and legally and without shouting. He paused. But I want you to understand something before you go. Nobody moved. I built a house for this family with my own hands, Anthony said. I worked every weekend for 3 years. I missed parties and holidays and rest. I did it because I believe that what you build for the people you love is the best thing you can do with your time on this earth. He was quiet for a moment. You took that house. Fine. Houses can be replaced. He looked at them one by one. But you also took 2 old people and left them on a road to die. And for that, I don't have a word strong enough. The room was absolutely silent. You can go now, Anthony said. Robert stood up first. H.E. Street.